So I don't think we need to wait that long because there's lots of people here already. Maybe we should get started.
Yeah.
Even though it's fairly afternoon. My name is Jamie Lee, Mining Watch Canada, based in Ottawa, and so together with Kairos, Mining Watch is presenting this session on extractivism, a north-south perspective on extractivism. Before we start, I'd like to recognize that we are on Mohawk territory. That this is land that has a longer history and a longer relationship with people than most of us have in this continent. And that has, I think, real implications for how we talk and how we behave. And before we start the presentations, I think I will briefly introduce the panel of people in this corner of the room, and if we can have a brief go around the room for people to just give their names and maybe one location or affiliation that they'd like to identify with. So as I said, my name's Jamie Dean. I'm with Mining Watch based in Canada. Mining Watch has been working on mining in Canada and Canadian mining interests globally for 17 years now, and I've been there the entire time. So I'm not sure what that means about me or about Mining Watch, but it does mean that we've got a fair bit of experience and history in looking at the dynamics of this industry. To my left, your right, John Dillon is the coordinator of the Ecological Economy program at Kairos. John has a very long history in this field and has written extensively, going back to what GATT in 1973, before the GATT was folded into the World Trade Organization, and there's a whole, as I said, there's a whole history there. Are you still on the World Council of Churches?
Funny thing is, I ran into them on sending me a whole delegation from the World Council of Churches, advisory group, economic policy. They're here at the forum.
Excellent. Gloria Chicaesa is with Acción Ecológica from Ecuador, and has an even longer history. Acción Ecológica started in 1986. Gloria is the coordinator of the mining area of Acción Ecológica, and has a background in psychology. Rachel Warden is acting as interpreter, also with Kairos, and this is just Latin America program. I don't know you.
And gender justice.
And gender justice. So Rachel's been coordinating the gender impacts work that Kairos has been doing, which has been very powerful. Jacinda Mack is the coordinator of the First Nations Women Advocating Responsible Mining in British Columbia. She's actually from Soda Creek and Tetzel, Sepakwa territory, and has been coordinating the have been coordinating our community's response to the Mount Holly massacre, the disaster, the largest mining spill in Canadian history, which occurred 2 years ago last week, and has since moved on to work with First Nations advocating responsible mining. And Ian Thompson will be moderating today, and Ian is coordinator of the Resources and Rights Partnerships for Kairos. And he's been with Kairos for 11 years now. He has a background in engineering, which makes him uniquely qualified to talk about mining. So with that, I would like to maybe have as I said, a quick go around the room just so that we have a sense of who you all are and why you're here. So,
I'm Isabel. I'm with the North American Students for Corporation. It's a housing collective.
Ken Forster. I'm a Colony of Mary Immaculate in Ottawa.
I'm Alan Moore. I'm with Global Justice Now, which is a UK organisation.
My name is Alfredo Barahona. I work with Kairos as well. I'm Indigenous and Migrant Rights and Network Relations.
My name is Alma Brooks, and my people are the Wolastoqiyik, the people of the Beautiful River, and the tribal affiliation of my people is Eastern Coconut.
My name is Tara, and I'm a volunteer with Kairos, and I'm doing some writing and some photos.
there's one seat here as well. So carry on behind Tara as well.
I'm still for International Corporation.
My name is Zachary Graham with the Sisters of St. Joseph Toronto and various HIV and hepatitis C organizing in Toronto.
I'm Linda Snyder from Waterloo. I'm an academic, and my research has been looking at social justice issues in Mexico and Canada, and very much in mining.
Absolutely, I am this myself.
My name is Nick Lee. I'm a professor of sociology at the University of Colorado in the United States.
My name is Rachel. I'm a student in class.
I'm Marie Jackson from the Jesuit Forum for Social Faith and Justice.
I'm Kawas Francois, teacher of sociology in the State University in Port-au-Prince.
I'm Alex Garcia. I'm working for French NGO Independent Medicine.
Norman Stockwell, the Progressive Magazine and WORT Community Radio based in Madison, Wisconsin.
Alan Sontag with Development and Peace from Saskatchewan.
I'm Dana Miller-Kitch, also with Development and Peace, and also from Saskatchewan.
I'm Asia Javier. I'm with social work here.
I'm Christine from the Class Justice Network Africa based in Nairobi, I lead the Extractivism.
Ellie Pratt with the Africa Foundation and Canadian International.
Sylvia Skutchuk from Development and Peace in Toronto.
Christine Bell, I work at the National Office of the United Church of Canada. I'm a coordinator at the federal government.
I'm Roy Culpepper. I chair SALADA, which is an anti-land grabs coalition, and I also chair the Group 78, which is a progressive foreign policy group, both based in Ottawa.
I'm Keith Gottlieb with Development and Peace. I'm also, I think, the only bona fide Bermudian in this room. And is there any mining in Bermuda? No.
Leandro Gomez, I'm a student in Ottawa University, and my subject is mining in Colombia and state transformations.
Wendy Gishuru, also with the United Church of Canada, focused on Africa and the Middle East, including extractive issues in Africa.
Ellie Kurzer, I'm interested in the issue, and I work on Science for Peace in Toronto.
Tim Tyner, I'm a nature writer.
I'm Amy Gavin, also with the National Office of the United Church of Canada, working with digital communications mostly.
I am an observer for University of Edmonton.
My name is Annie. I work for Romero in Toronto Community Housing Program.
My name is Tom Turner. I'm with Development and Peace, and I'm from Laval, Alberta.
I'm Alejandro Bendaño from Nicaragua, researcher.
I'm Matty Turner. I'm a carpenter in Montreal.
Ashley Russell from the Justice, Peace, and Integrity Creation Office of the Missionary Office of Mexico. Very long.
I'm Mr. Waka from website PC and with Mexico.
I'm Rodolfo Bejarano from the American Network of Debt Development and Rights, based in Peru.
So, some people have come in since we started the go-around, so maybe we could pick it up.
I'm Mark McDonald. I work for the Indigenous Recipes Network.
My name is Jennifer Henry. I work as the Executive Director of Kairos.
Stephen?
I'm Stephen. I work as a postdoc at Center for Indigenous Conservation and Development Alternatives based in Rio.
I'm Pamela Brubaker. I'm a retired professor of Christian social ethics at California Lutheran University, and I've worked along with the WCC on women globalization issues.
We need a big theater.
That's crazy.
That's awesome.
So, many months ago, this idea was hatched to have a workshop on extractivism, that in the midst of the World Social Forum that we could have a bit of a different discussion, that we would, we could talk about what's happening on the ground and the struggles that people are engaged in over land and livelihoods and visions of development. And we could contrast and compare and look at what the common threads are from north and south and from the community perspective and sort of more the theoretical or analytical perspective. So the description we came up with, and I couldn't really improve on it, so I'll just read it, was that predatory extractivism, the exploitation of natural wealth for short-term profit without regard for its consequences, for people or the planet, is being challenged ever more fiercely, both intellectually and theoretically, and on the ground. Indigenous and popular movements, writers and thinkers in different parts of the world use different approaches and strategies, but the fundamental struggle for ecological, climate, and social justice is the same. This workshop is intended to bring together diverse experiences and see what common elements we can identify, to weave them together as elements of a common struggle. We'll then turn to you for reflections, stories, and ideas. In breaking with the consumer capitalist paradigm against predatory extractivism and working towards more sustainable development models on a local scale, as well as in movements supporting more sustainable traditions and more sustainable development models. Social movements, indigenous, peasant movements. So that's what we think can bring us together. We can try to describe more clearly what we are trying to do, what we're trying to create, and what we're trying to stop. And, a few years ago, I think the term extractivism wasn't widely used, and from my perspective, I think it developed out of an effort to make more sense and to more clearly describe what's going on. To look at the elements of colonial, patriarchal, imperialist, and racist imposition, and focus on the relationship with nature, the unsustainable use of natural resources and non-renewable resource extraction to create profit, whether that profit is social or private. And I think that's going to be a theme that we can touch on, where erstwhile socialist Bolivarian governments in South America are taking extractivist policies in order to finance their social programs, in order to promote a socialist vision, but one that doesn't break in any way with the extractivist model. Meanwhile, I think we're also quite familiar with the capitalist model of extractive development. It's one that Canada's been at the forefront of promoting and imposing, especially over the last couple of decades, but throughout Canada's history, essentially as a colonial experiment in Canada, and as in turn as a colonizer itself. So with that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to hand it over to Gloria to talk about the Ecuadorian experience and the Ecuadorian vision.
Bueno, buenas tardes con todos y con todas. Gracias por la posibilidad de compartir con ustedes una mirada desde, no sé si desde América Latina, más bien desde el sur, diría yo, desde Sudamérica.
Good afternoon. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share the perspectives. No, I don't know if it's from Latin America, but from the South America.
¿Cómo es un diálogo entre el norte y el sur y alternativas al extractivismo? Quizá empezaría por decir.
So, as is the dialogue between North and South and alternatives, I'm going to start by saying
que concebimos el extractivismo como la grande remoción de materias naturales, de bienes naturales, ¿no es cierto?, que son extraídos y que son exportados para el mercado global.
So we see extraction as the movement of natural resources from our countries to the global market.
Y esto, por supuesto, se hace, digamos, sin tomar en cuenta los costos ambientales, humanos, sociales y económicos que tiene para las poblaciones locales.
And this is without taking into account the cost, the environmental cost, the cost to people, the cost to communities.
Por supuesto, el extractivismo es el que ha sostenido y el que sigue sosteniendo el desarrollo, el paradigma del desarrollo.
And of course, it's this extractivism that continues to sustain development, or this model of development.
Y desde hace algunos años en América Latina, en el sur de América Latina, desde el sur de América, estamos cuestionando el desarrollo.
And for many years now, from Latin America, from the south of Latin America, we're questioning this model of development.
Sus contradicciones más íntimas que tiene, como pensarse en el norte y sur, en desarrollado, subdesarrollado, y todas estas dicotomías que ha tenido o que se ha impuesto.
And questioning the contradictions and the discourse, the idea of north and south, of developed and underdeveloped, these dichotomies that are presented.
Estas rupturas entre primer mundo, tercer mundo, que nos ha llevado a reordenarnos y a funcionalizarnos a ese desarrollo.
And this breaks between the world, this idea of the first world and the third world, and how this has been used to develop these models.
Todo eso es lo que nos lleva en este momento a desenmascarar esas contradicciones.
And all of this has led to a moment where we want to unmask all these contradictions.
Tomando en cuenta que hemos tenido que recorrer ese camino de destrucción y de contradicción para alcanzar el desarrollo.
And taking into account that we need to rework this road of destruction, and if we really want development, sustainable development.
Ejemplo, hemos justificado la destrucción ambiental y social a nivel planetario para alcanzar ese desarrollo.
Because, for example, we've justified the destruction of the planet and society for this model of development.
Y todos fuimos, todos los países fuimos hacia allá, a la búsqueda del subdesarrollo. Todos estuvimos corriendo detrás del desarrollo, todos queriendo alcanzar el desarrollo. Y hay unos países que alcanzaron ese desarrollo.
And all of us have been running to try and get this, catch up to this development. All of us in the world have been trying to do this, and some of us have succeeded. Some countries have succeeded.
Esos países que alcanzaron el desarrollo se denominaron países desarrollados, países industrializados, versus a esos otros países que estaban en el subdesarrollo.
And these countries who have made it, these are the developed countries, the industrial countries, are seen as are versus the underdeveloped, or the countries in the third world.
Solo que esos países que alcanzaron el desarrollo, esos países que llegaron a la supuesta meta, que era la que iba a resolver, que era el desarrollo.
And these countries that have made it to the supposed development.
Son estos países industrializados, ya no solamente en el norte, pero son estos países industrializados, sobre todo los que alcanzaron el desarrollo, los principales causantes de que estemos en un debacle civilizatorio, en una debacle ambiental enorme en el planeta.
And it's these countries, it's mostly these countries who have made it, these industrial countries, and they're the principal causes of the debacle that we find ourselves in this crisis of civilization and of the environment.
Y son los responsables de los mayores impactos y desastres ambientales, tanto en sus países pero además exporta a esas empresas que generan enormes daños en nuestros países.
And it's these countries that are responsible for most of the their own countries, but in ours. And Canada is an example of this with mining. There's mining in Canada, and they're also exporting this to other countries.
Y de todas maneras tienen una mayor responsabilidad en lo que llamamos ahora el tema del cambio climático.
And
crisis, esta que ese desarrollo, esa meta a la que todos corrían y queríamos llegar, no es la solución.
But this challenge that we found ourselves in has made us realize and made us question the model of development that we find ourselves in.
Evidenciamos que esa línea única a la que todos queríamos llegar funcionó. Y cuestionando a este desarrollo.
It's evidence in the crisis we find ourselves in, and it's also that evidence in the fact that we're dissatisfied. As we face this crisis.
Y quizá más que cuestionar, muchos nos estamos negando a que ese desarrollo sea el destino común de la humanidad. Nos estamos negando a eso y estamos tratando de quitar del camino ese desarrollo y diciendo, esa no es la ruta.
So we're saying, and we're questioning this model of development because and the idea that it's not another form of development.
Norte frente a esa crisis planetaria que ha generado el desarrollo, está buscando alternativas.
So the people, not only people in the South, people in the North as well, in facing this crisis, they're looking for another form of development.
En este contexto se pone incluso a nivel constitucional, en el caso del Ecuador, el summa causa o el buen vivir, que es una visión distinta que está nacida de las raíces indígenas y comunitarias.
So in this context, even within the constitution of Ecuador, we have buen vivir, or living well, which is based on very much and in relationship with a lateral view, and this is coming from South America.
Surge con una visión distinta, contrahegemónica, porque está en la diferencia, y por eso tiene unas miradas.
So it's a distinct vision. It's a vision that is outside of this hegemony, because it comes from the areas that are marginalized, the people that are marginalized. Distinct.
Se ha mantenido al margen, y por eso es que tiene unas prácticas que no son perfectas, nos dan unas pistas como humanidad y como civilización para intentar buscar caminos distintos al desarrollo.
So these are perspectives that they're distinct. They're not perfect, but they provide us with hope, hope for humanity and hope for different ways.
Por ejemplo, en los saberes indígenas no existe algo parecido al desarrollo. Una ruta lineal en donde hay que pasar por un proceso de desarrollo, ¿no es cierto?, que es superior al subdesarrollo. No existe esa línea así ascendente.
Indigenous wisdom and teaching this, the idea of development is not linear. You don't go from something that's underdeveloped, subdeveloped, to an idea of developed.
No existe tampoco esta noción de acumular bienes para poder vivir en una serie de acumulación de beneficios. Esto es una mirada casi naturalizada en el mundo occidental. No es algo por lo que tienen que atravesar los pueblos indígenas.
And there doesn't exist this idea of accumulating goods, accumulate more and more goods. This is very normalized in Western civilization, but it doesn't exist in indigenous thinking.
No existe la pobreza y la riqueza, y por eso es que el summa causa se ha convertido en una pista por la que podemos transitar, y en el caso del Ecuador no ha sido el fruto de unas mentes lúcidas de los gobernantes o de los asambleístas, sino que ha sido recogido desde los saberes, en este caso del pueblo quichua, que es el pueblo más extendido y que ha sido puesto a nivel constitucional.
And this idea, this dichotomy between rich and poor doesn't exist either. Doesn't exist within the notion of buen vivir, the idea of luxury. This doesn't to and is very in the
esto propio y la identidad de las raíces, porque siempre hemos estado hacia el norte del desarrollo. Ahora tenemos una mirada puesta en nosotros mismos, en nuestras raíces, en el causa, y creo que es un modo distinto, importante para la lucha.
And this is important to us because in the past, in the South, we've always looked to the North for as a reference point. But now, with this idea of buen vivir and this new idea of development, we're looking to ourselves, and it's more based on our own learning, our own world view, and a love for ourselves and our own teachings and development.
Son las voces de los otros y de las otras que estuvieron en la periferia los que nos llaman a alterar este sistema, a cambiar esta civilización, y los que nos proponen que a la resistencia como una alternativa y una propuesta permanente.
And so it's the voices from around, from the margins that are bringing this alternative. They're bringing this alternative forward. It's an alternative that's based on resistance.
Son las que nos están diciendo que es la resistencia el camino más directo para alcanzar la sustentabilidad.
So we're saying it's resistance. This is the most direct path to sustainability.
En relación al extractivismo, yo terminaría mencionando o leyendo lo que dijo el economista Manfred Max Neef, que es argentino. En sus palabras dice, si me dedico por...
Okay, so I'm just going to end now on this issue of extractivism by quoting the Argentinian economist Manfred Max Neef.
Él dice, si me dedico, por ejemplo, a depredar totalmente un recurso natural.
So if I'm dedicated, for example, to destroy completely natural resources.
Mi economía crece mientras lo hago.
My economy will grow as I do this.
Pero a costa de terminar más pobre.
But the cost will be that I will end up more poor.
En realidad, la gente no se percata de la aberración de la macroeconomía convencional.
So in reality, that people do not
de la maldad.
Percata.
No se percata, no cae en cuenta.
No, they don't
realize. They're not aware of. They don't perceive.
They don't perceive this conventional macroeconomy.
Convencional que contabiliza la pérdida del patrimonio o el aumento de ingresos económicos.
And converts it into an increase in profit.
Detrás de toda cifra de crecimiento,
and behind all these statistics of growth,
hay una historia humana y una historia.
There's a history, a human history and a natural history.
Si esas historias son positivas,
and if these histories are positive, then the growth is welcome.
Porque es preferible crecer poco, pero crecer bien.
Because it's preferable to grow a little bit, but to grow well.
Que crecer mucho, pero crecer mal.
Than to grow a lot, but to grow badly.
Y bueno, dejo esto aquí para luego continuar el diálogo.
So I'm just going to leave you with that, and later we can continue the dialogue.
Thank you very much, Gloria. And as our moderator and timekeeper, thank you for working within the resources that we have allocated and actually coming in under time. And now we'll turn it over to you, Jacinta.
Oh, thank you so much. That was amazing. Hello, everybody. My name is Jacinta Mack, and I come, actually, I'm going to stand up. I come from British Columbia, or what is now known as British Columbia. So I'm from Canada, for the international people here. The territory that I come from is called Secwepemc, and in our language, that is the name of our beautiful land that we come from. It's our language, our history, our relationships, and language explains all of that. Indigenous languages are active relationships with the land. They're not descriptive or possessive. They explain what your relationship and responsibility is, and that's not something that is unique to where I come from. That's shared in many places. Where I come from, we are in the interior of BC. It's pine forests, lots of lakes, trout, and it's also home to what used to be one of the most productive salmon-producing rivers in the world, the Fraser River. And even from the time of when I was out, the river has changed so much. We would go down to the river, and in the summertime, and we would harvest our salmon with dip nets, and we would pull them out of the river, basically as many as we needed. And we would take enough to feed our family and no more. And we knew that families all along the river were doing the same. And it wasn't uncommon for each family to harvest 2 or more, because we would eat it. Salmon, deer, moose, all kinds of berries and medicines. And this is how we grew up, with gigantic gardens. And I didn't know until I was much older that I grew up on an organic, free-range diet. I was like, wow. And harder and harder to live out. So much pressure on land. Where we live, there are huge cattle ranches that take up, that the deer and the wildlife, they don't like to go near the cattle. They're smelly and they're stupid, and they take up lots of space, and they ruin the forest, and they dirty the water. They'll go right into the creeks and dirty the water. And so we've seen huge shifts since the time I've been young. And one of the biggest impacts that we've seen in the last 20 years has been the impacts from mining in our territory. And the history of British Columbia actually starts in our home territory. There was a huge gold rush in the 1860s that brought thousands and thousands of people to Caribou Gold Rush. And with this gold rush came diseases and settlement and the colonization of British Columbia. And the disaster at the Mount Poly mine that happened 2 years ago is part of the second gold rush in our territory. And where the tailings dam broke, it was built too high. It wasn't secured well enough. The engineering was there were a lot of problems that the investigations have revealed, and the problems had to deal with engineering, putting profits before safety. The government laws weren't strong enough to deal with all of the things that were happening. And so 26 billion liters of mining waste were released into the environment. The tailings came down on the mountain, and in this area, it's an interior rainforest, so it's a very special ecological place within our territory, and there are things there that we can't get anywhere else. In the middle of this dry forest, we have cedar trees and devil's club, and abundance of fresh water in the mountains. In the springtime, rivers create coming down the mountains from the runoff from the snow. And so it's a very unique place. And when this disaster happened, that entire watershed was compromised from the mine waste that came down. And the government response was to dismiss it and to minimize it, and to say that it was little more than, it was similar to an avalanche that happened everywhere. And that the water, once the tailings settled, would be perfectly fine to drink. And they had all of these things, and people in the area were devastated. In our communities, it was like a death, because we knew the importance and the value of that area, and we're still connected to that area. It's where we hunt, it's where the salmon, it's a nursery for the salmon in the river. There's tons of medicines out there. And all of the elders talk about Winuk. Winuk is the mountain huckleberries that grow there, that don't grow anywhere else. And they say, that's our gold. That's the gold in the mountains, is the Winuk. And so the impacts that came from this, a lot of the damage is still unknown, because it takes so long for that to really fully understand. And the government and the company response is, everything's okay. It's fine. Don't worry about it. The lake is so big, it'll dilute it so that you don't even have to worry about it. And so that's not good enough for us. And so we've been speaking out about, wanting to know more. Are the salmon safe to eat? The salmon are such a critical component of our culture. Everything in the summertime revolves around, we're going as families down to the river. We fish at night on the rocks in these canyons. It's very dangerous, but it's also a great time of excitement, and the community comes together, and the families are there, and this whole traditional lifestyle is getting more difficult to live. And as a result, our children have never fished on the Fraser River because of the impacts from mining, the impacts from overlogging, the impacts from pulp mills and the mines discharging directly into the Fraser River. And people don't know this, and it's important that you know, and I'm so excited that so many of you are here today. This responsibility to the land, when we talk about being stewards in our territory, it's based on our responsibility, not on our rights. Our rights are something, we have in British Columbia, our lands have never been treated, they've never been conquered, they've never been given up in any way. All of our, up to 90% of our ancestors died because of the diseases brought in by the gold rush, and they are occupied. And that's a struggle that we have today in British Columbia that continues. And so we maintain that we are the original people of the land, and we are still there, and we still know where we're from. And even though all of these people died, there were people that survived. And so when we talk about these diseases, it's important for us to remember that our bloodlines are ancient, and our bloodlines are the strongest of the strong. We're the bloodlines that survive, and that's what we have to teach our children. And the work that I've been involved in, and meeting all different kinds of organizations and other Indigenous people who are facing the same types of crises all over the world, it's the same story. The mining is systemic. And the mining that happens in British Columbia is the hub of mining in the world. And what happened at Mount Holly and how that disaster is handled is rippling out into the world. And we have to keep them accountable. And we just had the 2-year anniversary of the disaster. And the government office in British Columbia, the Ministry of Energy and Mines, issued a statement that they are now a world-class leader in mining regulations. And we hit them hard with all of our own stories that that's not true and that it's not good enough. And coming up to a very basic minimum standard is not world-class. That should have happened a long, long time ago. And so we're also trying to reveal these untruths, but to go beyond that, to go beyond just fighting them, to create something that's positive in our communities, to get people engaged. Okay. And so the work that we're doing really is to out of a responsibility to the land, out of a responsibility to each other, and to also bring the stories of Canadian mining companies in other countries doing the same things. When the disaster happened in our territory, we said what happens at Mount Holly doesn't stay at Holly. It's going into the water. Everybody's downstream, and the work that I do with FN Warm, we really want to work with other people and to share each other's stories and to support each other in that way, and to really bring home the stories of Canadian mining companies, and that Canadians need to be aware that this is happening, that this is in the name of Canada happening all over the world, but also in our country, and that Canadian mining companies going abroad saying that everything's okay here in Canada, that's also not true. But I would really like to end it on a hopeful note, is that we're all here and we're aware, and I please ask you in our tradition as a witness of the story to share this with your friends and family and bring this back to your homes and to become more involved in this. And I thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for sharing that story with us and for entrusting us with that responsibility to take it with us from this place. I'll turn the floor now over to my colleague, John Dillon.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to try to be very I want to introduce some ways of understanding extractivism that I developed in a paper. There's a few copies in the back on just transition to a life-sustaining economy. And what I rely on there is another Latin American scholar, Edward Gudiñas from Uruguay. And he introduces, I think, a very helpful distinction between three types of extractivism: predatory, sensible, and indispensable. Predatory extractivism, I don't think I need to describe. It's what we've been talking about here. We all know about it. We all hear the stories of disasters from around the world and the human consequences and the consequences for all life, invoking indigenous spirituality. The second category is interesting because so often we as non-governmental organizations, we campaign to reform and take the rough edges off the worst kind of performance, like say our mining companies. So we campaign, the protection of ecosystems, for health and safety protection, for trade union rights for workers in mines. Restoring ecosystems, which of course is not possible, but at least cleaning up some of the worst of the mine waste. We campaign that mining companies will pay fair taxes and royalties, and we campaign often to upgrade the resources that are extracted for the again, this is a model of development that Gloria was critiquing. But I want to posit that in the situation we're in now, as Gloria explained so eloquently, particularly the responsibility we have around climate change, I don't think that kind of for reforms is any longer enough. I think we have to take seriously the third category, where he talks about, well, what is indispensable extractivism? In other words, some kinds of extractivism are dispensable. We don't need all of those materials that are pulled out. And we have to have a serious conversation about pulling back exploitation. Doesn't mean I think that all mining would end. As we look, for example, to make the transition to a greener economy, one based on renewable resources. Some kinds of extraction, for example, we may need more of that because it's very useful for batteries, which we're going to need as we transition to solar power. So there'll be selective ways in which certain kinds of extraction will continue. But what's the kind we don't need? Jacinta has given us a moving testimony. She said 90% of the ancestors died. 90% in the gold rush. A few years ago, my friend Richard Swift wrote a provocative essay in the New Internationalist under the title of "Stop the Gold Rush." And he went so far as to say, do we need any more gold mining? Because when you think about it, what happens to much of that gold? Some of it may be used for jewelry. Maybe we don't need all that jewelry. But a lot of it ends up just in bank vaults. They're taken out of one hole in the ground with enormous destruction and put back in another hole in the ground. And the last thing that we need, despite the current of opinion that says we should return to a gold standard, is a monetary system based on gold. John Maynard Keynes called gold that barbarous relic. And if you want to know what another kind of monetary system would look like without gold, we can ask Roy Culpepper, because Roy's an expert on that. We're not going to talk too much about that, but believe me, Roy will agree, we don't need a gold system. We don't need gold as a commodity that people speculate on because they're afraid of what's going to happen to our, in fact, fragile present financial system. We need to put an end to predatory extraction of gold. And in that, we also, of course, have to think about people that are affected. Just as we talk about a just transition for workers in moving from a fossil fuel-based economy to a renewable-based energy economy, we do have to, of course, think about people that might be displaced from the mining industry. And there's a particular statistic that really struck me in this New Internationalist article. There's some 100 million people around the world who work as small-scale or artisanal gold miners. 100 million people. And I always say, let's be careful about romanticizing that activity, because it's often very, very dangerous. People are killed in cave-ins. They use mercury to separate the gold. Hardly an activity we want to perpetuate. But of course, there are real people, very poor people involved. We have to think about how they also are part of a transition to a more sustainable, just economy. And the second, and maybe perhaps the most obvious and urgent right now, transition we need to make away from extractivism is from fossil fuels. In a workshop this morning, we were talking about carbon budgets. And we heard a little bit about this yesterday in the DNP workshop from Liddy, from the Philippines. And the fact of the matter is, if we want to stay under global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, we have only about 5 to 7 years to transition if we continue extracting fossil fuels at the rate where we're extracting them. It's a very, very short time frame. So it's very urgent that we move as quickly as possible off of fossil fuels. If the transition were to the 2 degrees Celsius goal, well, we might have 20 years. But the scientists are telling us that 2 degrees of warming is already too much, too destructive of life on our planet. And so we have to think about stopping, first of all, the most destructive kinds of fossil fuel extraction. This means the tar sands, and it means what Elma here from New Brunswick, we celebrated in last year a forum on fracking, which is very, structural. You know what fracking is, I don't need to explain it. Very ecologically destructive, and the kind of fossil fuels that we absolutely do not need to make the transition. And say that these are the challenges worth talking about. Forum and Acción Ecológica was involved in founding Mining Watch and in pioneering the work in Ecuador in the Yasuni. They put on the global agenda this idea that our friend, the poet Nemo Masi calls, keep the oil in the soil, the coal in the hole, and the tar sands in the land.
Great. Thank you, John, for that, and to all of our speakers. I think living up to what Jamie proposed at the outset was putting on the table some of those fundamental rethinkings and paradigm shifting